the door so wide, in a suit standing tall with pride, here to learn and here to grow, in the light of his knowledge's glow. Stories that I heard so clear lived in my mind year after year. W.T. Kirkpatrick, here I stand, ready now to shake his hand. What to turn store, open wide, show me more. What wisdom's call, I'm here to learn to stand tall. Books lined up on every wall, echoing a distant call. In eyes I saw the spark, guiding me through learning's art. Outside in the morning light, future bright, I'm feeling right. Kirkpatrick's home where dreams begin, a world of knowledge, let me in. To turn store, open wide, show me more. What wisdom's call, I'm here to learn to stand tall. Books outside in the morning light, future bright, I'm feeling right. Kirkpatrick's home where dreams begin, a world of knowledge, let me in. To turn store, open wide, show me more. What wisdom's call, I'm here to learn to stand tall. Answers call, I'm here to learn to stand tall.
Mother's life ain't got turns gray. Clears the memories of yesterday. Boredom's four walls, cruel and stark. Little Jack's heart now left in the dark. Cancer strips door.
All right. We are going to continue, or I'm going to continue with reading from C.S. Lewis's letters. He is writing in 1914 from his tutor, W.T. Kirkpatrick's home in Surrey, Great Bookham in England. This one is dated October 6th, 1914. Written to his childhood friend Arthur Greaves, who lived, I guess, either across the street or down the street from his childhood home in Belfast. Dear Arthur, I will begin by answering your questions, and then we can get on to more interesting topics. The plot of my would-be tragedy is as follows. The action is divided into the technical parts of Greek tragedy. So, 1. Prologos. Okay. Yeah, this is his story. He's writing about Loki and Thor, his Greek tragedy. This is his, I was about to say his first attempt at a story. I don't know if that's technically true or not. He had invented several stories about a fictional land called Boxen with his brother. That was kind of a combination of the real world India and then another fanciful world that they created of talking animals. Anyway, this is Lewis, 15 or 16 years old, trying to put together a Greek tragedy. 1. Prologos. Loki, alone before Asgard, explains the reason of his quarrel of the gods. He had seen what an injustice the creation of man would be and tried to prevent it. Odin, by his magic, had got the better of him and now holds him as a slave. Odin himself now enters with bad news. Loki, as is shown in the dialogue, had persuaded the gods to make the following bargain with the giant Fasold, that if Fasold, in one single winter, built a wall round Asgard, the goddess Freya should be given him as his concubine. The work is all but finished. The gods, repenting of the plan, are claiming Loki's blood. 2. Perodos. Thor, Freya, and the chorus enter. After a short ode by the latter, Thor complains that Loki, who is always the gods' enemy, has persuaded them to this plan, well knowing that it would come to no good. Loki defends his actions in a very scornful speech, and the two are only kept from blows at the request of Odin and Freya. Odin, though feeling qualms on account of their ancient friendship, agrees to Loki's being punished if the latter cannot devise some way out of the difficulty by the next day, when the appointed winter is up. The others then withdraw, leaving Loki alone with the chorus. He has been cringing to Odin up till now, but on his exit bursts out into angry curses. 3. Episode 1. The chorus pray to the spirits of invocation to help Loki to find a plan. His only desire is to be able to save his own head and plunge the gods into even deeper morasses. A long dialogue ensues between him and the chorus, the result of which is this plan: that Loki will send a spirit of madness into Fasold's horse, which always accomplishes the greater part of the work. Vide Myths of the Norsemen. The chorus agree, and Loki sets off to Yarnveed, Ironwood, to instruct the spirit. 4. Episode 2. It is now quite dark. The chorus are singing a song of hope and fate when Fasold enters with his horse, dragging the last great stone. He stops and converses with the chorus. In the dialogue which follows, the genial, honest, blundering mind of Fasold is laid open, and his frank confession of his fears and hopes for Freya and his labors forms a contrast to the subtle intrigues of the gods. At last he decides to move on. He urges the horse, but at that moment the frenzy seizes it. It breaks from its traces and gallops off, kicking its master and leaving him senseless in the snow. Presently he recovers, and after a very sad and indignant accusation of the gods, goes off to mourn his vanished hope. He cannot now hope to gain the dear prize for which he labored all those months. The morning is already at hand. 5. Episode 3. Loki, Thor, and Freya return. All are in high spirits and exult over the success of the plan. To them enters Ovid. By the appearance of the god, we guess that something is wrong. On being questioned, his explanation, greatly condensed, is this: the gods' empire rests on treaties, therefore on honor. When that honor is broken, their doom is at hand. Loki has conquered the giant. How? By fraud. We have broken faith and must prepare for the twilight of the gods. As soon as the general shock has passed off, Thor turns upon Loki and says that he is the cause of all this. Loki, seeing that he has accomplished his design, throws off the mask of humility that he has been wearing, and confessing that it was all his plan, bursts forth into fearful cursings, maybe, upon Thor and Odin. Since Loki cannot be killed by any known weapon, Thor purposes to pinion him on an adjacent boulder, etc. Vide Myths of the North, as a punishment. Odin, though without enthusiasm, consents, and he is bound. Thor, Freya, and Odin go off. 6. Exodus. Loki, bound to the rock, is indulging in a satiric dialogue with the chorus when Odin returns. As soon as Loki sees him, he bursts into violent abuse. Odin has come to offer him pardon and release. He, Odin, is a lonely god. Men, gods, and giants are all only his own creatures, not his equals, and he has no friends, merely a crowd of slaves. Loki, who had been brought forth with, and not by, him by fate, had supplied one. Will he be reconciled? Loki, however, casts his offer back in his teeth with many taunts. Seeing that they can effect nothing, Odin and Chorus withdraw, and the tragedy ends. Such then, in brief, is the skeleton of my poor effort, poor indeed in its intrinsic worth, and yet not so poor if you could set it to soul-stirring music. As an opera, the parts would be like this: Loki, tenor, maybe. Odin, baritone. I say maybe because he's got a question mark in parentheses after tenor. Odin would be baritone. Thor, bass. And then in parentheses he says, of course. Freya, soprano. Fazold, also bass. And then leader of the chorus, contralto. She has quite a lot to do here and there, he puts in parentheses. He continues, of course, you would readily see what musical points could be made. Nevertheless, I cannot refrain from giving you a few of my ideas. To begin with, Loki's opening speech would be somber and eerie, expressive of the fire god's intriguing soul and endless hatred. Then, Parados, the first song of the chorus would be bright and tuneful, as a relief to the dramatic duet that precedes it. The next great opportunity for atmospheric music comes in episode 1, where the theme of the spirit of madness is introduced. You can well imagine what it ought to be like. Then, episode 2, we would have a bluff, swinging ballad for the huge, hardy giant. And of course, the madness motive again, where the horse breaks loose. Then some dawn music as a prelude to episode 3 and Odin's speech about their position. What an opening for majestic and mournful themes. But the real gem would be some inexpressibly sad, yearning little theme where Exodos, Odin, expresses his eternal loneliness. But enough! I have let my pen run away with me on so congenial a subject and must try to get back to daily life. As for my average Bookham day, Bookham is where he's studying under the tutelage of W.T. Kirkpatrick. There is not much to tell. Breakfast at 8, where I am glad to see good Irish soda bread on the table, begins the day. I then proceed to take the air. We are having some delightful crisp autumn mornings till 9:15, when I come in and have the honor of reading that glorious Iliad, which I will not insult with my poor praise. 11 to 11:15 is a little break, and then we go on with Latin until luncheon at 1. From 1 to 5, the time is at my own disposal to read, write, or moon about in the golden-tinted woods and valleys of this country. From 5 to 7, we work again. 7:30, dinner. After that, I have the pleasant task of reading a course of English literature mapped out by himself, i.e. Mr. Kirkpatrick. Of course, that doesn't include novels, which I read at other times. I am at present occupied with, as English Lit, Buckle's Civilization of England. That's H.T. Buckle, History of Civilization in England, published 1857, and I guess republished in 1861. And of my own accord, Ibsen's plays. Hoping to hear from you soon with all your views and suggestions for Loki. I am, yours sincerely, C.S. Lewis. P.S. If you begin composing in earnest, you'll find the libretto in my study upstairs. To his father, from Gaston's, postmarked the 13th of October, 1914. I guess Gaston's is the same place where he's staying. My dear Pappy, I am astonished to hear that the Glenmaconians are still so foolish as to stick to the Russian delusion, as Kirk has pointed out several times. This extraordinary rumor and the credit paid to it is a striking illustration of the way in which a mythology grew up in barbarous or semi-barbarous ages. The Glenmaconians, 34, let's see. This is the Ewart family who lived near the Glenmacken house. See the Ewart family in the biographical appendix. Well, let's read some more. Sorry, the Ewart family. Let's read up some more on that. 1 second. Let me go find it. I'll find it here in just a minute. The Ewart family. The head of this Belfast family was Sir William Quartus Ewart, who was born on the who was born on the 14th of June, 1844. He's the eldest son of Sir William Ewart, MP, the first baronet. After taking a degree from Trinity College, Dublin, he went to work in the family firm of W.M. Ewart and Son Limited, flax spinners and linen manufacturers. In 1876, he married Mary Hurd, lived 1849 to 1929, who was the eldest daughter of Robert Hurd, J.P., of Pallistown, Kinsdale County, Cork. Mary Hurd was the niece of C.S. Lewis's maternal grandmother, Mrs. Mary Warren Hamilton. See the Hamilton family. Sir William and Lady Ewart were the first cousins of Flora Lewis. This is C.S. Lewis's mother. And they are the relatives Lewis refers to as Cousin Quartus and Cousin Mary in Surprised by Joy, Chapter 3. The Ewart family lived in Strandtown, very near the Lewises, in a house called Glenmacon. It is referred to in Surprised by Joy as Mount Bracken. Lewis wrote in Surprised by Joy, Chapter 3, Lady E was my mother's first cousin and perhaps my mother's dearest friend, and it was no doubt for my mother's sake that she took upon herself the heroic work of civilizing my brother and me. Sir W., Cousin Quartus, was gracious, childlike, deeply and religiously humble, and abounding in charity. No man could feel more fully his responsibility to descendants. He had a good deal of boyish gaiety about him. At the same time, I always felt that the conception of duty dominated his life. His stately figure, his gray beard, and his strikingly handsome profile make up one of the most venerable images of my memory. Warnie Lewis also wrote of the Ewarts in the Lewis Papers, Volume 3, page 252. He said of Sir William, "My father once summed up his character in 4 words, a great Christian gentleman. He had the Christian ideal that wealth is a trust, and his disbursements were never the mere largesse of a rich man who chooses to avoid the momentary discomfort which the refusal of alms entails. Children loved him, and he was at his best in their company. His love of children knew no restriction of race, class, or creed. He found his chief conversation in simple tales of his own town and countryside, and in stories of other lands gathered from the accounts of various missionaries. He had taken a keen relish for any story illustrative of the shrewd, pawky humor of Ulster." Of Lady Ewart, he wrote in the Lewis Papers, Volume 3, 253, "Tranquility was her astounding characteristic, and this quality, engrafted on the easy, gracious good breeding of the old-fashioned Southern Irish aristocrat, made her, in her middle and later years, a perfect mistress of her table and drawing room, and a very lovable old lady. Her mere presence in a room diffused something of the quiet charm of a still day in autumn. The Ewarts had 5 children. One, Robert Hurd Ewart, 1879 to 1939, who succeeded to the baronetcy after his father. 2, Charles Gordon Ewart, 1885 to 1936, who married Lily Greaves, the sister of Arthur Greaves. 3, Hope Ewart, 1882 to 1934, who in 1911 married George Harding and moved to Dublin. 4, Kelsey Ewart, 1886 to 1966, who lived near Glenmockin all her life. 5, Grundrida Gunny Ewart, 1888 to 1978, who married John Forrest in 1927. Describing the Ewart sisters in Surprised by Joy, Chapter 3, Lewis said, "It was the 3 daughters whom we knew best. All 3 were grown up, but in fact much nearer to us in age than any other grown-ups we knew. And all 3 were strikingly handsome. H, the eldest and the gravest, was a Juno, a dark queen who at certain moments looked like a Jewess. K was more like a Valkyrie, though all, I think, were good horsewomen, with her father's profile. There was in her face something of a delicate fierceness of a thoroughbred horse, an indignant finesse of nostril, the possibility of an excellent disdain." Wow, I wonder if this lady would take that as a compliment. Your face reminds me of a horse. She had what the vanity of my own sex calls a masculine honesty. No man ever was a truer friend. As for the youngest, G, I can only say that she was the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Perfect in shape and color and voice and every moment. But who can describe beauty? Warney added to their portraits as well. Of Hope, he said, "She was a handsome woman, of a dark, almost Italian type, with an air of dignity which she acquired early in life. She was very near to the Edwardian ideal of the beautiful woman. It was she who gave Glenmockin an infusion of the larger world which lay outside Belfast and Ireland. She inherited and combined in herself that thoughtfulness and charm which she found in each of her parents. She was best of good company, even-tempered and radiating a cheerful common sense serenity in whatever company she found herself in. Her marriage began the breakup of Glenmockin, which was never quite the same house again after she left it. Of Kelsey, he wrote, Kelsey was the least intelligent and most energetic member of the household. She had less pretensions to beauty than her sisters, but there was an open-air freshness about her which supplied its place. The war was the great event of her life. At the first opportunity, she joined the Corps of Women car drivers known as the Fannies, and went to Aldershot, where she so enjoyed her experiences that for ever afterward, her conversation was liberally sprinkled with anecdotes of her army days. And of Gundreda, he said, Gundreda was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. It's funny, just with a name like that. Maybe not the most beautiful woman he ever heard. She had masses of red gold hair and the glinting brown eyes and perfect complexion, which so often goes with such a coloring. She had a radiant and infectious, almost childlike gaiety, which was always bubbling over into delighted and delightful laughter. She possessed, in a supreme degree, the Ulster capacity for extracting amusement from the dialect and idiom of her own countryside. And to hear her frequent imitations of the broad County Down accent was a joy. All right. That's this family that he is referencing at the very beginning. I am astonished, my dear Pappy, to hear that the Glenmaconians are still so foolish as to stick to the Russian delusion. As Kirk has pointed out several times, this extraordinary rumor and credit paid to it is a striking illustration of the way in which a mythology grew up in barbarous or semi-barbarous ages. If we, with all our modern knowledge, fall into an error so ludicrous as so unfounded, it is hardly to be wondered at if primitive man believed a good deal of nonsense. Our household has an addition this week in the person of Mrs. K's theatrical friend, Miss McMullen, who is staying here for a week or 10 days. Soul, she's a boy, although perfectly well she sees fit to travel down to Gaston's with a bath chair, a maid, and a bulldog. However, they are the only faults, and they are amusing Kadada. This is the most extraordinary place I have ever seen for weather. We have had bright sunshine, frost, and not a spot of rain ever since I arrived. The touch of frost, unaccompanied by any wind to blow the leaves off their branches, has converted the country into a veritable paradise of gold and copper. I have never seen anything like it. Everyone at Bookham is engaged in a conspiracy for getting up a cottage for Belgian refugees. For some weeks, this is the footnote, for some weeks the Germans had been intent on reaching the Belgian and French coastline. In an attempt to prolong the defense of their port city, Antwerp, the Belgian government appealed to Britain for troops. Thousands of British troops rushed to the aid of Antwerp, but by the 10th of October, it was impossible to hold it against the Germans. By this time, tens of thousands of Belgian refugees had arrived in England. A noble scheme, I admit, carried out, however, in a typical fussy, parishional way. Some of Kirk's comments are very funny. Any news from the Colonel? Who's the Colonel? A nickname given Warney by his father and brother. No, he's talking about his brother. Any news from the Colonel? When is he off to the front? Did you ever, at Lurgan, read the 4th Georgic? Lurgan is the school that C.S. Lewis's father attended when he was a boy, where W.T. Kirkpatrick, Lewis's tutor at this point in Lewis's life, was the headmaster. So he naturally asks his father, hey, when you were at school, did you read the 4th Georgic? Now, what is the 4th Georgic? Virgil, the greatest Roman poet, wrote 4 Georgics, which are didactic poems in hexameters on Italy and traditional ways of rural life. Lewis goes on to say, it's the funniest example of the colossal ignorance of a great poet that I know. Dang. It's about bees, and Virgil's natural history is very quaint. Bees, he thinks, are all males. They find the young in the pollen of flowers. They must be soothed by flute playing when anything goes wrong, etc., etc. I hope that your dental troubles are now gone and that you are quite well in other ways. Yes, it is a bad cold, Joffer. I am scanning the horizon for a brown suit. I suppose you have settled down to winter weather and customs by now at home. Your loving son, Jack. His next letter is to Arthur Greaves, his friend, his childhood friend, his neighbor. Written Wednesday, October 14th, 1914, from Bookham. Before I read the letter, I'll read the biography of Arthur Greaves because I haven't read that yet, I don't think. Greaves, Joseph Arthur, lived 1895 to 1966, was born in Belfast on the 27th of August, 1895. He was the youngest of 5 children born to Joseph Malcolmson Greaves, 1858 to 1925, and Mary Magretta Gribben, 1861 to 1945, of Brooklyn, New York. Their home, Burnaw, was directly across the road from Little Lee, where the Lewis family lived. Arthur's father was the director of J&TM Greaves Limited Flax Spinners. The family had traditionally been members of the Society of Friends, but had converted to the Plymouth Brethren in 1830. Arthur's only formal education came from his years at Campbell College, Belfast, between 1906 and 1912. He enrolled at the Slade School of Fine Art in London in 1921 and left with a certificate in 1923. For years, he had tried to get to know Jack and Warney Lewis, but without success. Then came their first real meeting in April 1914. I had been so far from thinking such a friend possible, Lewis wrote in Surprised by Joy, Chapter 8, that I had never even longed for one, no more than I longed to be the King of England. Their correspondence, which began in 1914, lasted half a century. There seems to be almost nothing that Lewis felt unable to mention to Arthur. When Albert Lewis, his father, died in 1929, Jack found a home at Burnaw, or wherever Arthur was living. It was during a summer holiday at Burnaw in 1932 that he wrote The Pilgrim's Regress. Lewis seems not to have preserved many of Arthur's letters, but Arthur saved nearly all of Lewis's, and they were published in a work called They Stand Together, published 1979. During the compilation of the Lewis papers from 1933 to 35, Warnie Lewis contributed a portrait of Arthur, in which he said, "His circumstances have been such that he has never been compelled to face the issues of life, to know it as it is, to gauge the degree of toleration which the community owes to the individual and the individual to the community. I do not here refer to the fact that he has never had to earn his living, but mean that with a child's liking for being liked, he has the child's distress at the obtuseness of the grown-ups, who cannot see that if only everyone would always do as he wants them to do, the world would be a very delightful place to live in." Jack felt obliged to supplement this portrait with something from his own pen in the Lewis Papers, and he said of his friend, Lewis Papers, Volume 10, pages 218 to 20, he said, "Arthur was the youngest son of a doting mother and a harsh father, two evils whereof each increased the other. The mother soothed him the more to compensate for the father's harshness, and the father became harsher to counteract the ill effects of the mother's indulgence. Both thus conspired to aggravate a tendency toward self-pity. It can easily be imagined how such a child grew up, but who would have foretold that he would be neither a liar nor a talebearer, neither a coward nor a misanthrope? He was the frankest of men. Many of the most ludicrous episodes which could be told against him turn on his failure to acquire that visor to the human face, which such a training usually teaches a man to wear. He was the most faithful of friends, and carried the innumerable secrets of my own furtive and ignoble adolescence locked in a silence which is not commonly thought effeminate. Under illness or inconvenience he was impatient, a loud and violent, but not a lengthy grumbler, but danger left him unmoved. Until I met him, and during my frequent absences, his position was much the same as that of an imaginative boy in one of our public schools. Yet he never showed any inclination to revenge himself after the fashion so familiar among our modern intelligentsia. He continued to feel, indeed he taught me to endeavor to feel with him, at once a human affection and a rich aesthetic relish for his antediluvian aunts, his mills-owning uncles, his mother's servants, the postmen on our roads, and the cottagers whom we met in our walks. What he called the homely was the natural food both of his heart and his imagination. A bright hearth seen through an open door as we passed, a train of ducks following a brawny farmer's wife, a drill of cabbages in a suburban garden. My cabbages. These were things that never failed to move him, even to an ecstasy, and he never found them incompatible with his admiration for Proust or Wyndham Lewis or Picasso. He was completely unworldly. He never in his life read an advanced book or imitated a modern painter because he felt that he could thus become a superior being. The motive was always either his genuine pleasure in them or else the advice of ill-chosen friends. For Arthur was both humble and unstable. He could be persuaded to read, or at least begin, any book, to adopt, for a time, any canons of taste, The last speaker was always right to him, but all these fluctuations went on over a fundamental constancy. To the charm of the homely, he was never untrue. And if he was easily drawn into the follies of any and every coterie, he could not by any process be infected with its pride. During the earlier years of our acquaintance, he was, as always, a Christian, and I was an atheist. But though, God forgive me, I bombarded him with all the thin artillery of a 17-year-old rationalist, I never made any impression on his faith, a faith both vague and confused, and in some ways too indulgent to our common weaknesses, but inexpugnable. He remains victor in that debate. It is I who have come around. The thing is symbolical of much in our joint history. He was not a clever boy. He was even a dull boy. I was a scholar. He had no ideas. I bubbled over with them. It might seem that I had much to give to him, and that he had nothing to give to me. But this is not the truth. I could give concepts, logic, facts, arguments, but he had feelings to offer. Feelings which, most mysteriously, for he was always very inarticulate, he taught me to share. Hence, in our commerce, I dealt in superficies, but he in solids. I learned charity from him and failed for all my efforts to teach him arrogance in return. If I had to write his epitaph, I should say of him what I could say of no one else known to me. He despised nothing. Contempt, if not the worst, surely the most ludicrously inappropriate of the sins that men commit, was, I believe, unknown to him. He fulfilled the gospel precept, he judged not. Wow. Arthur was deemed unable to work because of a bad heart, and he lived on an income. Okay, sorry. I can't just keep reading after what Lewis said about him in that last paragraph, because I'm having some thoughts run through my mind. They're not very well baked, but he makes this comment right here where he says, I bombarded him with all the artillery of a 17-year-old rationalist. I never made any impression on his faith. And then he goes on to comment on his faith here. This is very interesting. A faith both vague and confused, and in some ways too indulgent to our common weaknesses. But nonetheless, it was inexpugnable. So when I was reading that, I was wondering what he was talking about, and I don't think he clearly goes on to explain what he meant by our common weaknesses, too indulgent. Perhaps what he means right there is, how can I say this? A little too, from a faith standpoint, perhaps maybe a little too gracious towards indulging in one's weaknesses, or taking part in one's pet sins. Maybe that's what he's talking about. And I think of certain people on the theological spectrum, and I can think of one in particular, that I met years ago, who was a pastor. And I actually don't know this about his behavior. I just know it about his counsel, which was, hey, maybe don't worry about, that sin so much, or committing it. Try not to focus on it. And maybe that's really good advice. I don't know. I don't have any thoughts one way or the other on it, but it just made me think of, his statement right here where he says, in some ways he's too indulgent to our common weaknesses. His faith was. And then the last part right here, I guess there's a certain piece of me that looks at people who maybe are more liberally inclined on the theological spectrum, and just thinks, oh man, that's dangerous, or that's scary, or that's not good. But then I go on to read, just it's incredibly high praise as he continues, in this paragraph. Um, where is it? If I could write his epitaph, I should say of him, I could say of no one else, he despised nothing. Contempt was, I believe, unknown to him. He fulfilled the gospel precept, he judged not. And I think for people who aren't, or maybe even especially people who came out of like a fundamentalist Christian background, lean heavily into this direction. There's some talk on some of the conversations around the Paul Vanderclaeosphere that some like to refer to as TLC. Some criticism of those who don't ever judge or find it high in their hierarchy of virtues to make sure and not judge. And it's just very interesting that he mentions that here. I don't really know what thoughts I have on it. And the only other thing that I see in here that was quite notable is something that not sure if this is still going. I had a weird lag there for a moment. Just this piece right here, I think, would resonate with him. He remains victor in that debate between faith and atheism and rationalist artillery. The thing is symbolical. The thing is symbolical of much in our joint history. He was not a clever boy. He was even a dull boy. I was a scholar. He had no, quote, ideas, but I bubbled over with them. It seems that I had much to give to him and that he had nothing to give to me. And that's where I'm reminded of Luke. It's deeper than ideas. But the fact, the assertion that I had nothing to give him, or that I had everything to give him or much and he had nothing to give me, is not the truth, Lewis says here. I, of course, could give concepts, logic, facts, arguments, but he had feelings to offer, feelings which most mysteriously, for he was always very inarticulate, he taught me to share. Hence in our commerce I dealt in superficies, but he in solids, right? Lewis is at least making the claim about himself and his concepts, logics, facts, and arguments, that those were mere edifices. But the deepness were the feelings, the solids that his friend Arthur would share with him, such as, and other things, right? He learned charity, and he failed in all of his efforts to teach his noble friend arrogance in return. It's just very strange to hear something like that. Even Surprised by Joy was a little bit later in Lewis's life, so he's reflecting on everything that he's known and everything that he's argued. It's just very interesting to hear something like that from somebody who is so well known as an apologist and offering logical rationale for faith in Christ and becoming a Christian. For him to be on the side of Luke Thompson, for example, and in essence to say it's deeper than ideas, and the more important things, the more solid things are underneath these superficialities of concepts, logic, facts, and argument. So I might clip this piece for you, Luke, because you might enjoy it. Okay, so Owen Barfield, no. We'll get to Owen Barfield. Walter Hooper goes on to say, Walter Hooper, the editor of these letters, goes on to say, Arthur was deemed unable to work because of a bad heart, and he lived on an income from the family business. He nevertheless won some recognition as a landscape painter and was exhibited in 1936. He was a member of the Royal Hibernian Academy His painting of his friend Forrest Reed, the novelist, is in the possession of the Royal Academical Institution, Belfast. Much of his time was spent painting in and around his beloved County Down, where he spent the whole of his life after his mother's death in 1949. Where he spent his whole life, period. After his mother's death in 1949, he moved to a cottage called Silver Hill in Crawfordsburn, County Down, where Lewis often stayed. It was here that Arthur entertained Jack and his wife Joy during the summers of 1958 and 59. I'm going to pause for a second and see if I can find any of Arthur Greaves' paintings. Let me see if there's anything. Arthur Greaves. Let's see if we can spell this right. C.S. Lewis friend paintings. I'm not seeing anything. That's all right. No luck there. Anyway, where was I? It is ironic that while Lewis's acceptance of a thoroughgoing supernatural Christianity was due in part to Arthur's influence, Arthur himself vacillated between religious beliefs. The original damage may have been caused by his Plymouth Brethren parents, but other forces were soon at work. He vacillated between the Church of Ireland and the Baha'i faith. Near the end of his life, he settled down to what had always suited him best, Quaker services with about 5 elderly friends in a small meeting house in Bangor, close to Silver Hill. There he seems to have found the peace he was looking for all his life. The last time that Jack and Arthur were together was a weekend spent at the Kilns in June 1961. Jack was making plans to visit Arthur in Ireland during the summer of 1963, but a heart attack prevented this. "It looks as if you and I shall never meet again in this life," he wrote on the 11th of September 1963. "Oh, Arthur, never to see you again." Among Arthur's closest friends was Lisbeth Greaves, wife of his cousin Ronald. A fortnight before he died, he asked her to lunch with him, after which she recalls that he sensed that he would die soon. He asked her to pray with him, that when his time came, he would die in his sleep. On the 27th of August 1966, he celebrated his 71st birthday. 2 days later, his cousin Lisbeth recalled, he died in his sleep, just like a happy child sleeping peacefully, with a linen handkerchief over his eyes to shade them from the early morning sun. Wow, I don't know if I should stop there or if I should read this next letter. That's to Arthur. You know what? I'll read the next letter. To Arthur Greaves, Wednesday, the 14th of October, 1914, from Bookham. My dear Arthur. Again, this is, sorry, let me pause for a second, just to set where we are on the timeline and C.S. Lewis's life. This is 1914, and so he is 16 years old, roughly. Again, I don't know when his birthday is. I probably should learn that. My dear Arthur, although delighted as always to find your letters on my plate, I was very sorry to hear that you were once again laid up. I hope, however, that it is nothing more than a cold, and will soon pass away. I was very glad to hear your favorable criticism of Loki, and I hope it is genuine, and to see that you are taking an interest in it. Of course, your supposed difficulty about scoring is a phantasm. For in the first place, if we do compose this opera, it will, in all probability, never have the chance of being played by an orchestra. And in the second place, if by any chance it were ever to be produced, the job of scoring it would be given, as is customary, to a hireling. Now, as to your budget of tasteful and fascinating suggestions, your idea of introducing a dance after the exit of Odin, etc., is a very good one, although it will occasion some trifling alterations in the text. And speaking of dances in general, I think that you are quite right in saying that they add a certain finish to both dramatic and operatic works. Indeed, when I was writing them, there were certain lines in the play which I felt would be greatly helped out by appropriate movements. Thus the lines, "The moon already with her silvery glance, the horned moon that bids the high gods dance," would suggest some good moonlight music both in motion and orchestra. Turning to your remarks about illustrations, I must confess that I have often entertained that idea myself, thinking that, since you never spoke of it, there was some radical objection on your part. I never liked to suggest it. Now that I am undeceived in that direction, however, need I say that I am delighted with your idea? Your skill with the brush, though by no means superior to your musical abilities, has yet a greater mastery of the technical difficulties. I have only to cast my eyes over the libretto to conjure up a dozen good ideas for illustrations. First of all, the vast dreary waste of tumbled volcanic rock with Asgard's gleaming high above in the background, thrown out into sharp relief by the lurid sunset. Then, the foreground there is the lithe, crouching figure of Loki, glaring with satanic malignity at the city he purposes to destroy. That is my conception of the prologos. 2. Then Odin thundering through the twilit sky. Twilit? Then Odin thundering through the twilit sky on his 8-footed steed. What a picture. 3. Again, Freya, beautiful, pathetic, and terrified, making her anguished entreaty for protection. 4. A somber study of the moonlight choral dance that you so wisely suggested. 5. The lovesick Fasold, raging in impotent fury when he discovers that he has been cheated. And 6. Last of all, Loki, bound to his rock, glaring up to the frosty stars in calm, imperturbable, and deadly hatred, and so on and so on. But you, with your artist's brain, will doubtless think of lots of other openings. I do sincerely hope that this idea will materialize, and I shall find on my return a whole drawer full of your best. I am afraid this is rather a Loki letter, and I know I must not expect others to dote on the subject as foolishly as I do. I am going to ask for myths and legends of the Celtic race. Footnotes: T.W. Rolliston's Myth and Legends of the Celtic Race, published 1912. He's going to ask for it as a part of his Christmas box from his father, so that as soon as I put the finishing touches to Loki Bound, I can turn my attention to the composition of an Irish drama, or perhaps this time a narrative poem. Whether Arthur Greaves, this is a footnote, ever attempted any part of his share in the musical drama is not known, but Lewis's lyric text of Loki Bound filled 32 pages of a notebook, the only part of which has survived consists of 819 lines reproduced in the Lewis Papers, volume 4, pages 218 to 220. Yeah, I asked in a previous video, I said in a previous video I didn't know if any of Loki Bound still existed, but it looks like part of it does. So I'll have to make a footnote of that. Lewis Papers. Well, there is a footnote. I'll have to make a note of that myself. I'll just put a bookmark here. Where are we? Finishing projects like Irish drama, or this time a narrative poem. The character of Maeve, the mythical warrior queen of Ireland, you'll know that name if you watch The Boys on Amazon Prime, will probably furnish me with a dignified and suggestive theme, but we shall see all in good time. Mrs. Kirkpatrick, the lady of this house, has not played to me at the time of writing my last epistle. But since then, she has given me a most delightful hour or so, introducing some of Chopin's preludes, Chance and Trist. This is by Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky's. This is Tchaikovsky's Chance and Trist, and it was first performed in 1878. She's also played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The nickname of Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 14 in C sharp, opus 27, number 2, 1802. She also played Chopin's March Funèbre, first performed in 1827. She played the Peer Gynt Suite, which is Edvard Grieg's piano solo, the Peer Gynt Suite number 2, 1893. And she played several other of our old favorites. Of course, I do not know enough about music to be an authoritative critic, but she seemed to me to play with accuracy, taste, and true feeling, so that there is added another source of attraction to Great Bookham. For the value of Mrs. K's music is to me twofold. First, it gives me the pleasure that beautiful harmonies, well executed, must always give, and secondly, the familiar airs carry me back in mind to countless happy afternoons spent together at Bernal or Little Lee. Strange indeed is my position, suddenly whirled from a state of abject terrorism, misery, and hopelessness at Malvern to a comfort and prosperity far above the average. If you envy my present situation, you must always remember that after so many years of unhappiness, there should be something by way of compensation. That sentence alone could allude to the argument that Lewis makes in The Problem of Pain, juxtaposing everything in the chapters leading up to his heaven chapter. That, I think in the New Testament it says, all this present suffering doesn't compare to what's to come. It's a little bit of a microcosm in that sentence right there. I'll read it again in case you missed it. He says, strange indeed is my position, suddenly whirled from a state of abject terrorism, misery, and hopelessness at Malvern to a comfort and prosperity far above the average. 2 sentences. If you envy my present situation, you must always remember that after so many years of unhappiness, there should be something by way of compensation. All I hope is that there will not come a corresponding depression after this. I never quite trust the Norns. What is the Norns? The female fates of Norse mythology. Interesting. I have come to the end now of my time and paper, and I dare say of your patience. While I remember, it would be as well for you to keep that sketch of the plot of Loki, so that we can refer to it in our correspondence when necessary. Yours very sincerely, Jack Lewis. P.S. Have the honeymooners come home from Scotland yet? J. And the footnote on the honeymooners is, were probably Arthur's brother, Thomas Greaves, and Winifred Linus, who were married on this September 22nd, 1914. I've come to the end of my reading as well. I'll stop there. So until next time, take care of yourself.